Hi, everyone. I'm Ed O'Keefe in for Elaine Quijano here in Washington. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. Lawmakers are scrambling to avoid a government shutdown after failing to pass a temporary funding measure Monday night. They have until midnight Thursday to find a solution. If not, starting Friday, some federal agencies could begin shutting down. So Senate Democrats are looking for a way to go it alone after Republicans blocked a bill that would have funded the government through December 3rd. The bill effectively pays off the spending agreed to by a previous bipartisan process. But now Republicans are asserting it's a Democrats-only problem.
There's no chance Republicans will help lift Democrats' credit limit so they can immediately steamroll through a socialist binge that will hurt families and help China.
In our lunch, it was clear that my caucus will not stand for the irresponsible and dishonest Republican default plan. Going through reconciliation is risky to the country and is a non-starter.
He references lunch because on Tuesdays they have lunch to talk about what either caucus is concerned about. So with both parties sitting at a stalemate, it remains unclear what the path forward might be. Here's how the White House is weighing in.
It's also our hope that if Senator McConnell isn't going to help us avoid a default and a shutdown, at least he'll get out of the way and let Democrats do it alone so we can avoid a default. And right now that question remains up in the air.
And as that remains up in the air, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is warning Congress of severe consequences unless they can agree to raise the debt ceiling by October 18th. If that doesn't happen, she says expect a new recession and financial crisis. And that comes as Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell says supply bottlenecks causing inflation are getting worse. He says those blockages need to be cleared before prices can come down. That could put added pressure on economic recovery. But Powell argues most of the inflation gains come from a small category of items. Plus, top military officials testified about what went wrong in Afghanistan. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair General Mark Milley faced questions from lawmakers on their execution of the withdrawal from Afghanistan.
It was the largest airlift conducted in U.S. history, and it was executed in 17 days. Was it perfect? Of course not. We moved so many people so quickly out of Kabul that we ran into capacity and screening problems at intermediate staging bases outside Afghanistan. And we're still working to get Americans out who wish to leave. And we did not get out all of our Afghan allies enrolled in a special immigrant visa program. We take that seriously, and that's why we're working across the interagency to continue facilitating their departure. Even with no military presence on the ground, that part of our mission is not over.
On another busy day in Washington, let's bring in Weijia, Courntey Subramanian, and Nicholas Wu. Weijia is CBS News' senior White House correspondent. Courtney's a White House correspondent for USA Today. And Nicholas is a congressional reporter with Politico. Weijia, let's turn to you first on the North Lawn. Good to see you. Before we dive into the details and the blow-by-blow of another busy day, the fate of the president's agenda sure seems to rest in Congress's hands. But as you've said, this is about much more than just his own agenda, right?
You're certainly right, Ed, and it is great to see you, too. It's rare that we get to share a screen since usually one of us is perched right here on the North Lawn. But this is a real test for President Biden, right? Because you remember, of course, following his campaign, he ran on the promise of being a unifier-in-chief, having been someone who was making the sausage himself as a senator for more than 30 years. So this is a test to see of whether he can actually do that. And let's forget about bipartisan unifying right now. The problem is within his own party, trying to find some sort of compromise to push through his economic agenda. And right now, it seems that they are at a stalemate, even though publicly the White House is saying that they are optimistic, that there are, things that are happening and progress being made behind the scenes. It's unclear what that is because the Progressive Caucus said today, they were very clear that they will not vote on the bipartisan infrastructure bill without the reconciliation package. You have House Speaker Nancy Pelosi planning to have a vote on that bipartisan piece on Thursday. And so that's why we see so much traffic here at the White House today with key players, including those two moderate Democratic senators, Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin here at the White House, as the president really struggles to find some common ground. But he has to, Ed, because it is a test of his credibility and his promise as that unifier.
It sure is. And look, we are spending a lot of time this week because it is part of what ultimately happens, talking about the process and the players and the strategy. But let's remind the viewer who's sitting at home and might think that a lot of this is going over their head. What's in it for them? What ultimately is expected to be in this big piece of legislation?
Well, so there are two pieces of legislation that we're talking about, and they do seem to be paired together, whether we like it or not, because that's what progressives said they are going to do. So we have that smaller package, which is a bipartisan effort that hopefully will bring more jobs to the American public. It focuses on traditional infrastructure like roads and bridges, tunnels. And then you have this $3.5 trillion package that the president argues you have to have in order for people to do the jobs that he plans to create in that smaller package. And so that's where the social programs come in, to offer everything from universal pre-K to 2 years free of community college, to a national paid family and medical leave program, to extending that child tax credit that is in place. So there are lots of things here that he believes will really help people just find their footing, to be able to find new jobs, to be able to do the work so they have that safety and support net in place. And I should mention a ton of investments on climate change, and that's really important here, Ed, because, of course, climate change is one of the key crises that he mentioned that he wanted to address when he ran.
And such a big priority for members of his own party. So absolutely. But either way, would transform the economy, and the goal for Democrats is to really make it easier for working families to do those jobs, as you said. So, Nicholas, with all that said, let's dive into the details a little more. In the last few hours, Senator Bernie Sanders has tweeted that his fellow progressives who serve in the House should vote against that bipartisan infrastructure plan that's scheduled for a vote on Thursday if the social spending human infrastructure bill, the one packed with all the social policy and climate change that Weijia mentioned, doesn't also get a vote this week. Is it me, or are Democrats really still feuding with each other at this point?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in some ways, everything has changed here with the sequence of these bills. And at the same time, nothing has really changed in any of the major factions' positions here. Progressives are still saying that they will vote down this bipartisan infrastructure bill on Thursday if they don't have the reconciliation, big $3.5 trillion social spending bill moving at the same time. And moderates are still saying that they need to have a vote on the infrastructure bill by Thursday. And so it's really bringing everyone at loggerheads here. And at some point, something is going to have to give. But at the moment, that doesn't seem like it's going to be the case. The Progressive Caucus held their weekly meeting today. And a source in the room told me that member after member really lined up after pretty much an hour of a meeting to declare their support for putting the infrastructure bill only after this social spending plan, and threatening to take down the infrastructure plan if that demand isn't met. And so, this really leaves us at square one here, and this is going to have to resolve in some way, shape, or form in the next few days, or else a signature element of the Biden agenda could go down.
Not only a signature element, really the cornerstone. It could be just about everything domestically that he wants to do. Courtney, the president and those progressives that Nicholas mentions are calling on moderates like Senator Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to basically name a price, say how much they're willing to spend on the big social spending package. As Weijia mentioned, Manchin and Sinema had separate meetings at the White House today about all this, but they haven't yet given a ballpark figure on how much they're willing to spend, right?
Yeah, just, to build on what Nicholas said, not much has changed. We saw them, I'll note this is the third time in as many weeks that the two senators have showed up at the White House to talk to the president about his agenda. But they're still not willing to say, they're still not clear on what their red lines are, what the price tag is, and that's something that continues to frustrate many progressives who feel like they've already compromised with that $3.5 trillion number. And as both Weijia and Nicholas mentioned, continue to threaten to sink the infrastructure bill on Thursday when Nancy Pelosi brings it to a vote. I think there is recognition here that they need to make progress. They need to move the ball forward. in order to pass both the reconciliation package and the infrastructure bill. And we know that the president is in constant contact with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senator Chuck Schumer as they try to thread the needle between, with progressives and moderates here. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said today that the president still trusts the House Speaker's plan to decouple the two and bring infrastructure to a vote on Thursday, but this continues to be a political game of chicken, and it looks like Biden is trying to steer the party back on course and find a breakthrough with these two senators.
Yeah, it's incredible that they're still feuding with each other. Now, okay, we've talked about the bipartisan infrastructure plan. We've talked about the big social spending plan. Nicholas, remind us, where do things stand on raising the nation's borrowing limit?
That's also running into problems just as much as everything else on Capitol Hill is. There was some talk that Democrats might try to do this alone. President Biden talked with leaders in the House and Senate about trying to do it alone to try to raise the debt limit and avoid a default. But leaders in both chambers in the House and Senate have pretty much ruled that out, at least for the time being. Senator Dick Durbin, who is the second-ranking Senate Democrat, called that a total non-starter, saying that they wouldn't have enough time to go through this very specific party line process to raise the debt limit in the Senate before the risk of a default happened. And in the House, initially they were on a slightly different page. The majority leader, Steny Hoyer, said that Democrats could consider raising it alone, but then walked that back sometime later. And so, as with all these other issues on Capitol Hill, we really have all these problems coming to a head at once and colliding in one of the busiest weeks here in the Capitol.
And Courtney, today the Federal Reserve Chairman, dropped another stink bomb on Congress, saying the recent uptick in consumer prices has been more significant and will last longer than anticipated. It's going to create more challenges for them. Is the White House trying to get ahead of this at all?
Headaches for the Biden administration. We have heard them, largely echo what Jerome Powell said, which is he expects it to eventually abate. He expects it to drop back toward the Fed's 2% goal. And we've heard the Biden administration say this is transitory, but it continues to be an issue. This is this #1 economic issue for most Americans, according to a recent Pew survey. We've seen Republicans try to seize on rising prices by warning people that this is going to return to, a 1970-style inflation. That, of course, is a long way off. But his comments do underscore that inflationary pressure will be with us for a while longer. I would argue, though, that the more interesting part of that hearing today was Senator Elizabeth Warren's questioning of Powell and his record on financial regulation. She called him a dangerous man and said he acted to make the banking system less safe, and came out and said she will oppose his renomination if the president decides to renominate him for a second term. And that sort of raises the political stakes for the Biden administration on a very important decision before him on whether he plans to renominate Jerome Powell. They'll likely want to avoid another political fight within their own party.
Yeah, and I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that later in this hour. Weijia, back at the White House, the president heads to Chicago Wednesday for an event designed to promote getting the vaccine. This comes amid all the confusion, of course, over boosters and such. What is the White House hoping he can accomplish with this trip?
Well, tomorrow he really wants to focus on businesses mandating vaccines. And so he will highlight a couple of Chicago area-based businesses that are already doing that, like United Airlines, McDonald's, Walgreens. These companies have taken it upon themselves to implement some sort of rules for their workers to either be required to get their shots or have regular testing. Of course, the president announced, I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago, that was going to be the new standard for businesses, any businesses that had 100 or more employees, that was going to be the rule. But the problem is, Ed, that we're still waiting for the Labor Department OSHA to finalize that rule so that businesses can implement it, because some of these big businesses may have less reservations about doing that. But I know in our reporting, we spoke to smaller business owners who are really happy to have that political cover to be able to say that, well, we have to do this. And right now they don't have that because the rule's not ready. But still, he will go tomorrow to Chicago and try to encourage other businesses to follow suit as that rule is still being developed. And you're right about the boosters. I mean, a lot is at stake here for the president, because even though the Pfizer booster has been approved for people, you know, we're still waiting on data from Moderna and for Johnson & Johnson, even though the White House had already announced back in August that the plan was to have, you know, everyone be able to get their boosted shot starting earlier this month, which of course did not happen. But I think the White House and President Biden have made very clear to explain these bumps along the way. And they have said from day one that as the science evolves, as the data changes, they would make tweaks as well. And so they're actually embracing these confusing bits, because they're saying we are just adapting to what scientists are telling us and using it as an opportunity to draw a distinction between them and the previous administration that didn't always follow the science.
Well, we will track that tomorrow. And a reminder that amid all the other challenges this week in Washington, of course, the pandemic remains a big one as well. Weijia Jiang, always great to share a screen with you. Courntey Subramanian and Nicholas Wu with you guys as well. Thank you.